The last read aloud about the ancient Greek civilization is called Alexander the Great, Part 2. In our last read aloud, the last paragraph said, "But Greece was not enough for the ambitious king. He put one of his trusted advisors in charge of Greece and announced, 'It is time to end the Persian threat once and for all, and to call Persia my own.' With that, Alexander set out on his greatest adventure." I want you to predict what you think Alexander's greatest adventure will be and whether Alexander will be successful. Let's take a look at some vocabulary words in our reading today. The first word is attention. Close observation or thought. The next word is invader. Someone who enters a place, such as a country, by force in order to conquer it. And the last word is proclaimed. Announced publicly or officially. Let's begin. King Alexander of Macedonia led his Greek soldiers on foot across Europe, and then by ship across the channel of water that separated Europe from Asia. As the boats approached the far shore, Alexander flung, or threw, his spear so that it landed point first in Asian soil. Stepping from his boat, he freed the spear and told his cheering men, "We will conquer Asia with our spears." Leading the army down the coast of the Aegean Sea, he stopped at the site of ancient Troy. Here, 9 centuries before, the Greeks had fought a famous war, the story of which had been told in a well-known book called the Iliad. Since boyhood, Alexander has set a goal for himself. "I want people to remember me forever as a great hero, just as we remember Achilles, the greatest hero in the Iliad," he said. That goal of undying fame, more than anything else, would drive Alexander onward through his many adventures. As Alexander continued down the Aegean coast, citizens of Greek city-states that had developed in Asia welcomed Alexander's army. "Alexander will free us from the Persian rule," the people cheered. "We will live as free Greeks once more." Alexander told them, "Yes, we will free you." Yet, once his army took over a city or a nation, Alexander never gave up his control. He was determined to set the record for ruling the greatest empire in history, and he didn't think he could do that by freeing people and places he had conquered. Soon Alexander's soldiers found themselves facing an enormous Persian army sent by the Persian king. Between the two armies lay a river. Alexander charged across the river calling, "Follow me!" with his men rushing to keep up. They won the battle. Afterward, they reached the city of Gordia, where Alexander was shown the chariots of the ancient founder of the city. This ancient chariot was tied to a pole with a large knot. The elderly priest smiled at the young invader. "Legend says that only he who unties the Gordian knot can rule Asia," the priest said, knowing it would take days or weeks to do so. But with lightning speed, Alexander drew his sword and in one mighty stroke sliced the knot in half. "What a pleasant legend," he said, and rode on laughing. Alexander continued on to Egypt, which was also under Persian control. He defeated the Persian armies there, and the Egyptians proclaimed him pharaoh, or king. While in Egypt, and all through his travels, he sent samples of local plants and animals to his old teacher Aristotle, so that the great scientist could examine them. Alexander also tried to answer a question the wise man had long hoped to figure out. Why does the Nile River flood in the spring? "I cannot prove it without following the river all the way to its beginnings," Alexander wrote, "and this I have no time to do. But after talking with the most educated Egyptians, I believe that during each spring, rains fill the lakes in the mountains of northern Africa. The lakes overflow into the Nile, which carries the water down to the flatlands of Egypt." He was right, and Aristotle sent a letter of thanks. By the time the letter reached Alexander, however, he was back in Persia, winning battle after battle. At one of these battles, the Persians had many more soldiers than Alexander commanded. The Persian king felt so sure of victory that he left his family and a good deal of his treasure in a nearby city. When Alexander won the fight, he marched into that city and took the king's treasure for himself and his men. After several more victories, Alexander at last defeated the Persians for good and crowned himself king of Asia. As he continually fought these wars, Alexander insisted that his goal was to win glory for himself and his troops, and to prove no one else was stronger in force. After his success, Alexander married off thousands of his Greek soldiers to Persian women. He also took Persian soldiers into his army so that they could learn Greek ideas from his soldiers. He and his lifelong best friend even married two of the king of Persia's daughters in a double wedding ceremony. "We will unite all of our empire into one great nation," Alexander proclaimed. Alexander was so busy trying to conquer more and more places that he was not able to give much attention to the places he had already taken over. Instead, he left behind generals he trusted to rule for him, or let the kings he had conquered continue to run their countries while reporting to him. Then Alexander moved on. Without more attention on his part, his grand plan never completely succeeded. At the same time, Alexander began to claim, "I am one of the gods, for who but a god could do all that I have done?" It was around this time that people began to refer to him as Alexander the Great. Probably he himself was the first one to say it. Always restless, he was never satisfied that he had done enough in his life. Even conquering Persia did not satisfy him. "We'll continue east to India," he ordered. Fighting over great distances in rugged mountains, Alexander's soldiers reached northern India, where they found themselves facing a strong Indian army that featured a terrible new threat. "What on earth is that thing?" one Macedonian soldier asked another. "I don't know," replied his friend, "but I've never seen anything so big." In fact, the monsters they were facing were elephants, atop which rode Indian soldiers directing the huge beasts to attack and trample their enemies. Alexander ordered to the front of his army spearmen, carrying spears 21 feet long. He told them, "Do not let those beasts get close enough to reach you." With their usual confidence in Alexander, his men frightened off the elephants and won the battle. With northern India under control, Alexander and his army chopped down trees, made great wooden rafts, and rowed them down the wide Indus River into central India. But when the soldiers heard that Alexander intended to conquer the rest of India, for the first time they refused to obey him. Men who had been with him from the start explained, "We have marched by your side and fought as brothers under your command for 13 years. We are far from Macedonia. Please take us home." Alexander could not deny his men this request, so they turned around for home. That is when Alexander discovered that he was not a god. At only 33 years old, Alexander had lived through enough adventures for 100 lifetimes and had worn out the energetic body he had built to such strength as a youngster. He fell ill, still many miles from home. Alexander lay in his large travel tent. His generals gathered around him, each hoping to become king and rule Alexander's great empire after his death. They asked, "To which of us do you leave your empire?" He laughed and answered, "To the strongest." Then he closed his eyes. He had laughed because he knew what would happen next, and he turned out to be right. Fighting for control of his empire, his men would break it into pieces. None of them would match his record as the mightiest conqueror of all. As a result, he would never be forgotten. He would always be remembered as Alexander the Great. Here are some discussion questions. Feel free to pause the video in order to allow time to think and discuss. Were your predictions about Alexander's greatest adventure correct? Why or why not? What was Alexander the Great's goal in life? What large animals confronted Alexander's army in India? Did Alexander's army retreat when they saw the elephants? For what accomplishment is Alexander the Great remembered and named? Who took over Alexander the Great's empire when he died? Legend said that only the person who untied the Gordian knot could rule Asia. What did Alexander do with the Gordian knot? Did he go on to rule Asia? How do you think the priests felt about what he did? The read aloud told us that Alexander was too busy trying to conquer more and more places to give much attention to the places he had already taken over. Who taught Alexander the importance of observation or attention? Do you think Alexander forgot about the importance of this skill? How did this affect his ability to be a good leader? What would you have done if you were Alexander the Great and had already conquered Greece and Persia? Would you have stopped there, or would you have continued conquering foreign lands?